Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew DeSmit, and I'm the Senior Manager for Global Product Marketing for First Solar, located here in snowy Perrysburg, Ohio. Thanks for joining, everyone. In today's live webinar, we'll be joined by Nick Rydell-Lungskær from the Technical University of Denmark and PlantPredict's Product Manager, David Spieldenner, who will discuss the results of a year-long study to better understand bifacial energy gains utilizing 8 industry-leading prediction software packages, including PlantPredict. In this live webinar, we'll also learn how the accuracy of PlantPredict compares to other industry software packages when it comes to modeling bifacial modules. We'll learn how to properly interpret bifacial gain when reading PlantPredict reports. Observe useful tips for designing a power plant with bifacial modules. Discover the factors that determine if and when it is advantageous to deploy bifacial modules in your utility scale power plant. And we'll participate in a live Q&A session towards the end. If you have any questions or issues, please submit them using the chat or questions feature of the GoToWebinar platform. Today's webinar will be recorded, and we will send out a link to that recording and the related files to all attendees afterwards. Before we transition to our first presenter, we have a quick poll question, which I will put up in a moment. That poll question is, what is the most important contributor to bringing bifaciality into the market faster? We'll just give everyone a few moments to respond. All right, looks like we're getting the majority of the responses in. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, and I'll share those results. It looks like more precise yield simulations followed by cheaper modules and or better module technology. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Nick, who is completing his PhD in applied photovoltaics at the Technical University of Denmark, and he was the principal investigator on this study. Nick?
Thank you, Andy, and thank you all of you for attending this webinar. Before I go into the results, I just want to mention that if you want more details, you can get them from a recent publication, peer-reviewed, open access, so it's no cost to you, in Applied Sciences. So check that out if you want more info beyond what's presented here. On top of that, I want to point out that all the data, that's the input data used in all the software, as well as the validation data set, is published, open access, via this link here, and I'll be referencing it a few times throughout the presentation. And the idea is that if you want to redo or try these simulations yourself, you can in really any PV simulation software you want. And again, the idea is that these results that we publish in our study are reproducible. So let's start with the motivation and background for the study. This graph here shows the last 5 years of ITR PV reports. That's the International Technology Roadmap for PV. In the last 5 years, they've done these 10-year forecasts for what's the expected percentage market share of bifacial PV cells in the whole market. And what you can see from 2016 in purple to 2020 in red is that this 10-year forecast has become increasingly more optimistic each year. So what you can conclude from this is that we will be seeing a lot of bifacial PV in the future, but we are already seeing that. And unfortunately, bifacial PV does not benefit from the decades of field experience that monofacial PV does. And what this has created is sort of a perceived risk around the technology. So to capture this feeling or sentiment amongst the PV community, I refer to this poll that was taken in 2018 at the Bi-Fi PV workshop in Denver. And it looks familiar because it's the same poll that Andy presented to you a minute ago. So at that time in 2018, the top 2 reasons amongst this community need to bring bifacial PV to the market were sharing the field data and more precise yield simulation. So it looked like from the poll that sharing the field data, I guess there's more field data available, At the time, there was really a lack of understanding of what bifacial energy gains would be at the utility scale. So that's nice to see that maybe more data is being shared and published and more systems are online. But it did seem that the highest, the largest number of responses was for more precise yield simulation. So that still seems to be a need amongst the community. Well, these two needs was what really was the impetus or driver for the Bison Boost research project that I'll be presenting today. And maybe at the end of this, we can change some opinions. So how did we achieve our objectives? Well, it was largely with the bifacial PV test site just outside of Copenhagen, Denmark. It's about a 0.5 megawatt of monofacial and bifacial PV side by side in single axis trackers. So that's the 8 systems to the left side of the screen, as well as 8 south facing fixed tilt systems. That's the 8 systems to the right side of your screen. These systems are all, they have dimensions that are really analogous to what you would find at a utility scale. All strings in the park are electrically, we monitor the IMP and the VMP of all strings in the park, independent of the inverters. And this being bifacial, we have a lot of optical sensors in the park to understand not just the albedo, but also the rear plane of array irradiance. But today, we're just focusing on 4 of these systems. So T6 and T7, that's a bifacial and monofacial track system. And T12 and T15, that's a bifacial and monofacial fixed tilt system. Notice that both bifacial systems are inner rows, and that's intentional, and that's to avoid any potential artifacts that might be introduced by studying edge rows, for example, T1 and T9, where the rear radiance might be brighter than the inner rows. So if you want to model this system yourself, go to the open access data set, and in the site data and structural data tabs, you can find the info to recreate this site. Okay, so the model validation process we followed is relatively simple from a block level. 4 steps, starting with the model inputs. I'm not going to go through all the model inputs, but I'm just going to give you a sense of the most important inputs that we use in the work. If more details, check out the paper. Okay, so the most important input to any PV simulation model is the irradiance. And for this, we have high quality on-site measurements of the global, the beam, and the diffuse irradiance. So we're not using a TMY file. We are essentially creating our own custom TMY file from measurements that are co-located at the site. We filter the data according to best practices. We have uncertainty for each sensor, and we clean them quite regularly. And again, if you want this data to simulate the system yourself, in the metadata tab. This being bifacial, we need to talk about albedo. Albedo was also measured on site with Class A pyranometers. And although the albedo can change both spatially and temporally, we didn't see a whole lot of seasonal variation in the albedo during the year studied. So over the course of a year, it's about 21.5% albedo, which is pretty typical of healthy vegetation. You can get the hourly data on NREL's Duramat webpage, along with a bunch of other useful albedo data sets for understanding albedo. And you can get the monthly data in our open access data. So another important input is the electrical model. In the park, it's PERC, so monofacial PERC, and PERC plus bifacial. So we did flash testing on a sample of the modules before and after 1 year of field deployment to check for first year degradation. We found that on average, the bifaciality, which is the rear to front side efficiency, was about 67%, which is fairly common for PERC. And then inside the open access data set, you can see the coefficient and parameter values that we used that we extracted from the IV curves to great input for the single diode models. Okay, once we have our input, run those to our simulation software. Here are the 8 tools we studied. They fall into a few categories. Some of them are open source, so that's free code that you can download, modify, contribute to, and this would be things like NREL's Bifacial VF or SunPower's PV factors. Some of them are freeware, so it's free software that you can't really modify for your own purposes. Many features in PlantPredict and NREL SAM is a freeware. And then others fall into commercially licensed, so that would be the MobiDig tools from ISP Constance, and then PVSys and DNVGL's Solar Farmer tool. We felt, and there certainly are more tools than this out there, but we felt that with these 8, we got a good representation of what tools are being used, not just in PV industry to simulate bifacial PV performance, but also to some extent PV research. We can group them a few ways. Being bifacial, we need to talk about how the rear plane of array irradiance is calculated. So most of the models use a 2D view factor model to calculate rear irradiance. I don't have time to go into the difference between view factors and ray tracing, but in a nutshell, the view factor method is a simplified method that allows for more efficient runtime, whereas the 3D ray tracing and the MobiDig ray trace tool is the only ray tracing simulation we did. The ray tracing takes much longer, but the physical representation of how photons travel from the sun interacting with objects to the PV cells themselves is much more physically accurate, but it takes a lot longer to do those. It took about 12 hours to do each annual simulation with the ray tracing in our work. One more way to group them is whether or not they are a full model, meaning they can simulate not just the radiance, but also cell temperature, thermal behavior, and electrical behavior. So 6 of them are a full PV simulation package, but then 2 of them highlighted in green, that's Bifacial VF and SunPower's PV factors. They're just an optical model, so we can only use them to model the rear and front side irradiance, but they're still useful. So before I jump into the results, I want to highlight that we should not expect these 8 software to give the same result. And the reason is they oftentimes use different data or different models for the same sub-modeling steps. So for example, all 8 software use the Perez transposition model, but some of them use global and diffuse and others use beam and diffuse. And the choice of which one to use or the other does make some difference in the results. We have 3 different solar position algorithms used, and the difference amongst those algorithms really are highlighted at low sun angles. We have 4 different incident angle modifier models used. That's a way of accounting for reflection losses. 2 different thermal models used. That's NOCT and the Feynman model, and 2 different electrical models used. That's the Soto and what we're calling the PVSys version of the 1 diode model. So we should expect some level of difference at each step of the way. Okay, so once we've done our simulations, we extract the output from the different software, and then we compare those outputs to our field measurements when we have field measurements available. We have a lot of measurements, but this being bifacial and we have limited time, I think it makes a lot of sense to talk about the rear plane of array irradiance, because the rear plane of array irradiance really is the defining feature of bifacial PV modeling versus monofacial PV modeling. If you can get the backside irradiance correct in a bifacial PV model, well then your accuracy really should be no different than a monofacial simulation. So for this, we have 2 different types of radiometers on the tracker. So we have silicon photodiodes, one on the west, one on the east, and pyranometers, one on the west, one on the east. So in the results that follow, I'll be averaging those 2 of the respective type in the results. And then on the fixed tilt system, we never got around to installing silicon-based sensors, so we just have pyranometers there. In both cases, I'd like to point out that the sensors are always at least 10 meters away from the nearest edge, and that's intentional. That's to avoid any edge brightening effects. Okay, so let's look at the results for rear plane of array irradiance. These are simulated values. So the two graphs here show modeled rear plane of array irradiance as a function of the average modeled rear plane of array irradiance for the fixed tilt system and for the tracker system. So the different colors represent a year of outputs from the different software. That 45-degree black line would indicate that that particular software is a perfect match to the average of the 8. So we looked at the range of outputs, and we found that it really correlates well with the front side plane of array irradiance by about 2%. So in other words, at 1,000 watts per meter squared front side plane of array, the range of rear side plane of array irradiance predictions is about 20 watts per meter squared. So that's how they compare to each other. The question often is, how do they compare to measurement? And the answer in the fixed tilt case is pretty good. So this plot shows the modeled rear plane of array irradiance, the same software as before, but as a function of the measured rear plane of array irradiance. So this is the average of the top and bottom pyranometer on the fixed tilt system, and that 45-degree black line indicates a perfect match to measurement. We don't get a perfect match, of course, so the error summary is shown in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. MAE stands for mean absolute error, and RMSE stands for root mean squared error. RMSE is always going to be higher than MAE because you square the error. But we get MAEs between about 2 to 5 watts per meter squared over this roughly 1 month of data shown here. So if you consider that the contribution of the front side irradiance is really the dominating factor, and if you considered the front side plane of array irradiance about 1,000 watts per meter squared, this results in about 0.5% uncertainty due to the introduction of the backside irradiance calculation. This plot here shows the one selected day. So it's a clear sky day. If I chose any clear sky day, you would get a profile that looks like this curve. So the colors again are the rear plane of array irradiance outputs from the different software. The black line, the solid black line, shows the average of the upper and lower fixed tilt pyranometers, and then the whiskers, those range bars there, show the individual measurements. So the top whisker of the error bar is the bottom instrument, and the bottom whisker of the error bar is the top instrument. So what I wanted to show is that if I fill in the area between those two error bars, all of the software in the fixed tilt case agree within the uncertainty of the non-uniformity of the backside. Now, if I move my pyranometer locations, I could change this result. So I do think there is a need for better standardization and better understanding around where to place the rear plane of array irradiance pyranometers. Let's talk about the tracker case. We just talked about fixed tilt. So this is the same plot as 2 slides ago, but for the tracker case, here we don't get as good of agreement to the measurement. So you can see that the trend lines, the colored lines from the different software mostly underestimate the measurements in the solid black line. The only exception to that is the ray tracing simulation was actually had a little bit of a high bias. And the MAE and the RMSEs are all a little bit higher than the fixed tilt case. This does make some sense considering that trackers are just a little more complicated to model than fixed tilt systems. So the view factors in a fixed tilt case are essentially static. You would calculate them once for the whole year. And then in the tracker case, they're changing along with the roll angle of the tracker. So you also have the algorithm that introduces some complexity. So the tracker algorithm from the manufacturer may not match exactly with what the simulations give. So there is some extra complexity there. Okay, that was rear plane of array irradiance. Let's talk about the bifacial energy gain. Before I do, I want to just highlight the factors that can change the bifacial gain. There are many of them, So the solar resource is one, so more diffuse light, you will have higher bifacial gains. Higher ground albedo, reflectance, you will have higher bifacial gains. Higher module height, larger clearance from the ground, higher bifacial gains due to less self-shading. Wider pitch, so smaller GCR, ground cover ratio, higher bifacial gains again because of less self-shading. Module tilt is a little bit more complicated, but in general, higher module tilt will give you higher bifacial gain. All this is just to say that your bifacial gain mileage may vary from what we're about to show here. So these two plots show the monthly bifacial gain for the fixed tilt and the tracker case. Only models that are capable of simulating electrical performance are shown here. And then the black line is the measurement from the DC side of the inverter. The solid black line shows the average monthly bifacial gain, and then those error bars show the interquartile range of daily bifacial gain. So what you see in the winter months is that those error bars get quite large just because we have just a small amount of solar production during those months. So there's large changes on a percentage scale. The bifacial gain in these plots is calculated according to the equation in the top left. So you see a PSTC-BF and a PSTC-MF. Those data we use the flash data for. So if we had chosen to use the nameplate data from the manufacturer, the bifacial gain data in these plots would all go up by about 1.5%, and that is rather significant. If we take a minute to look at the plots and what the bifacial gain really is for the fixed tilt and tracker, you notice that on the tracker case, the black line, the measurements, it's pretty much always higher than our fixed tilt case. The reason for that at our site is the trackers have a much lower GCR than the fixed tilt system. So the trackers, let's say the fixed tilt, are much more packed in. There's more self-shading there, and that's why you have a lower bifacial gain in this case. When we compare to the simulations, in the months where it matters most, so that's really April to August, we get about 75% of our energy from the sun during those months. During those months, the simulations agree with within 1% or better, really for all cases. You can break down the bifacial gain, or you can calculate the bifacial gain rather in another way. So these two plots now have all the software shown. We're just calculating bifacial gain in a different way. So we're looking at rear plane of array irradiance divided by front side plane of array irradiance, multiplied by the bifaciality factor, which for our modules is about 67%. And then since we're comparing the optical models to electrical measurements, we need to apply an adjustment factor for the fact that the non-uniform illumination on the backside can induce electrical mismatch. It's a complicated factor to calculate. We've done it in a previous work shown here using some simulations and bifacial radiance. From that work, we deduced 3.2% for those losses. And what you see here, when you compare the simulations and the colors to the black lines, which is the electrical measurements, you still get a fairly reasonable approximation, but not quite as good. Especially in the tracker case, we have a low bias there, and that really corresponds to the regression I showed earlier with the rear plane of array irradiance measurements on the tracker. So some people just want a bottom line figure of, that's great that there's differences at all these different modeling steps, but what does it all add up to at the end of the day in terms of modeled versus measured energy? So for those folks, I have this graph here. So it's 4 tiles, and that represents the 4 different systems: fixed tilt, tracker, bifacial, monofacial. You have the software, all the colors show the software that are capable of simulating electrical performance. The y-axis is the energy deviation simulated to measurement on a monthly scale, and then on the far right is on an annual scale. you can see there's quite a lot of variation in the winter months. But in the months again that matter the most, in the summer, the errors are quite low, and on an annual basis, it all adds up to pretty small errors, typically lower than 3%. So a lot of people will ask this question about the accuracy of bifacial versus monofacial simulation. So if you take any respective software and compare its accuracy in its accuracy in monofacial versus bifacial, what we found is that there's really typically 0.5% difference or less when you compare the error of the two simulations, bifacial and monofacial. And this 0.5% really corresponds well to what we mentioned earlier with differences in measured versus modeled rear plane of array irradiance. And again, if you want to simulate these, all the energy of the power data is available in the open access data set. So you should be able to recreate these results in your own software. So just to wrap up here, we saw that the state-of-the-art bifacial software we studied here are adding about 0.5% uncertainty to the PV modeling chain. The simulated rear plane of irradiance values are presently matching much better to the fixed tilt system than to the tracking system at our site. We saw that the reduced order complexity view factor simulations are mostly within 1% of measured bifacial gains, but the tracker simulations didn't have as good an accuracy, but it was still around 2%. And just to give one caveat to all this, these are results from one site, and we think that results from more sites are needed to confirm our findings and to move the industry forward. So thank you for your time, and if you want more information, check out our paper, and I'll hand it over to Andy.
All right, thank you, Nick. Before we transition to our next presenter, we do have another quick poll question. And that is, how experienced are you with PlantPredict? And we'll just give everyone a few moments to respond to this one as well. All right, looks like we've got the majority of responses in. I'll go ahead and share the results here. David, it looks like the vast majority of the audience has never used it or used it a few times. With that, I'll turn it over to PlantPredict's product manager, David Spieldenner, who will run through the demonstration portion of the webinar. David?
Thanks, Andy, and thanks, Nick, for doing the study and then presenting it in such an easy to understand way. I think you did a fantastic job with that. And I'm really excited to see how many people we have that are new to PlantPredict. So the way that I've set this demonstration up, I'm actually going to show you, like Nick kept telling you, he said, you can simulate this for yourself. I'm going to actually show you how to simulate the results in PlantPredict for yourself. And we have a special gift for all of you who are participating in today's webinar. We're actually going to share with you a PPP file, which is a PlantPredict prediction file that will make this incredibly easy. You can see here our motto is solar performance modeling made simple. So we try to do things simple in everything that we do. And so we're going to provide to all of you that participate in today's webinar a PPP file that will make doing the simulation very easy so that you can do it on your own. All right, so to begin with, we are at the PlantPredict website. So this is where you're going to want to start. If you've never used PlantPredict before, it's really easy. It's www.plantpredict.com. And you can register for a free account just by clicking on the orange register button. It's going to ask you for the most basic of information, just your name, title, email address. And then it's going to take you to a screen where you're going to establish your password and a security question for password resets. And that's it. And you're in. And what you get with the free account is you get the ability to do quite a bit. And we had specifically intended, PlantPredict has always been free, and we always want to have a free version out there. And so you will get everything you need to model the power plant that Nick was talking about today with the free version. And I think that's really important. Now, of course, we want you to upgrade to the PlantPredict Premium version because we have all this great functionality that we're building, and we have this roadmap of functionality that's coming out. And you're going to need the PlantPredict Premium capability in order to do that. We've priced it in a way that we think it's very affordable. And we look at every one of our subscribers as an investor. You're going to be investing, and that money is going directly into new feature development. So I welcome all of you to become PlantPredict Premium subscribers, but you don't need to be a PlantPredict Premium subscriber to do the demo I'm about to show you today. All right. So with that, I'm going to log in. Now I'm logging in. I am a free PlantPredict Basic user at this point, and that's specifically how I set this demo up because I want to make sure that you can do this with a basic subscription. All right, in the upper right-hand corner, you have create new project or import project. Since we're providing you with a PPP file, you can actually import the project. So when I click the import project, I'm going to import it from a PPP file. And when I click on that button, I have to select my PPP file. So here's the horizontal solar single axis tracker bifacial prediction that we're going to model today. When I select that, hit open, it opens up our prediction import process. So the first thing that it does is it finds the location. We got the location in the file. Then it goes to weather data. So we've taken the weather data the measured weather data that Nick was talking about, and we've put it into the system, and we've actually made it global. So that means that you can actually gain access to that very easily. We also took the inverter file that Nick used was already a global inverter, and then the measured module that Nick and his team created, we actually set that up as a global inverter. So all of the data that you need, the weather data, the inverter data, and the module data, all global access, which that means is you can get access to it even with a free subscription. So I'm going to keep this weather file. It's titled Other Bifacial Study. It's got the location and all the important information in it. I'm going to move forward. You can see it jumped right past the inverter and right past the module data because it discovered that we had global versions of the inverter and global versions of the module data already in the system. And then it comes lastly to the ASHRAE station. The ASHRAE station that they use for this study is in the PPP file, and we're going to just keep that station. So you can see how easy it is to do that import. I guarantee everybody on this call is going to be able to do that. It's a very easy process. It only takes a few seconds when you're not trying to describe everything. All right, so here we are. We're inside a project. The project is named after the university to give the credit to where the credit is due. It already has us at that location, what elevation it is. And here we have our predictions. So we have one prediction set up here, and it's the bifacial tracker simulation. When I click on this, it's going to take me into the prediction screen. And what I want to do, actually, we're going to jump back here just because I want to show everybody the file that Nick is sharing with you. I have up on my screen here. So it starts off with your table of contents, and then you've got a site data tab, and it goes on from here. So we have the latitude, longitude. I'm just going to show you guys, this is where our latitude and longitude is. So we've got that totally lined up there. And here is the visual of the system that they have at DTU. We're going to focus on T6 here. All right, so now when I go into the prediction, we already have the weather file set up here. So there's the weather file. And here's where the albedo values get entered. It comes pre-populated in the file, but I want to show you here in the albedo data tab where those albedo values are on a monthly basis. Now you have to pay a little bit of attention here because in the file it starts with April and goes to March, but in PlantPredict we start with January and go to December. So you want to make sure that you start with your January values and go down, which we've already done. All right. Now jumping into the power plant, when I click on the power plant, Most of the time when I do demonstrations, I use the map builder. Today we're going to use the block builder, and we've modeled this out using the block builder of PlantPredict. So we've got one block, and this block has one array. This array is made up of 4 inverters is the way that it's set up right now. So when I mouse over the inverter, you can see a little pop-up window comes up and it says inverter DC field repeat 4. So that's telling me we have 4 inverters set up here. And each of those inverters has 2 DC fields connected to them. All right, so jumping back over to our site data here. So you can imagine we have 4 inverters, and then we have 2 of these rows connected into each of those inverters. So that's how we end up with 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, and we want to specifically focus on T6 here. So I've got the 2 DC fields set up. I'm going to open up this DC field, and you can see it's first off, it's using this Trina module that they use in the study. It's set up as a global module file, so you can actually pull it in, and you can see that it calls out DTU here. Let's see here. We have. I'm going to switch over to metric. Threw me for a loop there for a second. So at the DTU system, they had a 12-meter pitch and a GCR of 28%. So that's already built into the DC field. We have 22 module-wide strings. If I go to the field, you're going to see this looks a lot like the rows that we have in that image. The way that we got that is we have 4 parallel strings with 22 modules each. So that gives us 88 modules altogether. And you can see here, I set up the table-to-table spacing at 0.5 meter. And I got that off of the structural data tab here. So the tracker motor gap is 0.5 meter. So what you're seeing there is the tracker motor gap modeled into this DC field. All right, important thing to pay attention to. So since we're talking about bifacial, one thing that you really need to make sure is you've got the proper structure shading and backside mismatch values entered in there. You can get that generally from your tracker provider. Most tracker providers will publish values that can be used here both for PVSYST or for PlantPredict, but we've got that lined up with what was used in this study. Okay, so I've already covered some of the key factors: ground coverage ratio, bifacial losses at the DC field level. I also want to just jump into the module file real quickly. So there's the bifaciality factor, very important in doing bifacial simulations. You can see, like Nick said, we've got this set to 67%. All right, so those are the key factors in your simulation. Now I'm going to close out of there and run the prediction. All right, so we tried to make our prediction logic as fast as possible. And you can see we're going to run this simulation for 1 year in less than 10 seconds. Oh, and I skipped over one piece here that is really important. We're going to use nodal data for this analysis. So you're going to want to come in and turn on your nodal data. I skipped that step, so I apologize for that. So you come in here, you turn on nodal data for DC fields. Save the option. I'm going to have to rerun my prediction. So we got another 10 seconds we're going to have to wait. But what the nodal data will do is it'll give you all the details you need to understand how the simulation is built together. It's a very powerful aspect of the software, and it's very easy to produce. I'm going to show you what that nodal data looks like. All right, so the prediction is complete. I'm going to hit view results. All right, so here's the summary results for that prediction. I want to focus on our loss factor tree here while the nodal data is being generated. This is how you're going to calculate your backside gain. So it starts off with your backside effective irradiance. You can see here we got 8.1% backside effective irradiance increase. The blue bar tells us that it's an increase. Then we got to take off our bifaciality factor. So this is kind of in reverse because we put 67% on the module, but this is showing the difference there. So roughly 33% of that is taken away. So minus 0.2 or minus 2.64%. And then the other thing you're going to want to do is take away your backside mismatch. And that's how you're going to calculate your backside gain is the sum of these three values. Okay, now bringing in our nodal data, it comes to you in a zip file. And since we selected the DC field, and we had two DC fields set up for each of our inverters, you're going to see that I have DC field 1 and DC field 2. I only need to use DC field 1, DC field 1's results. So open this up and check out all this data. So this is really powerful, one of the more powerful ways to analyze your prediction. So first off, you got time series data here. So you got 8,760 records of data, one for each hour of the year. And then going across, you can actually break down how the prediction is put together, starting off with just your basic irradiance, and then it flows through and you actually get to losses, and everything that goes into the prediction is calculated here. We're going to fast forward to column BD, and BD is where you get the DC power. So this is looking at the DC power coming off of the modules. So we're not factoring in any clipping from the inverter, although the DC-AC ratio on this system is pretty low, and I think that was intentional by the guys at DTU in order to make sure that you're not having clipping skew your results. But we're going to take our values from BD. And now what I've also set up here, one of the things that's great is they've published their validation data, and it's on the last tab of this spreadsheet. And we filtered it down to T6 because T6 is that one DC field that we want to focus our attention on. Several of the rows are actually captured in here, and you can look at for the monofacial or the fixed tilt analysis, but we're focusing on the tracker bifacial, so that's T6. And what I did is I took and I copied that into another spreadsheet just to make the validation a little bit easier. And so I'm going to bring that one in here. I just opened it. So here it is. So this is my results, and I've slimmed down some of the columns. So we got our month, our hour, T6 is what we're using, our POA, our IMP, our VMP, and then our PMP, which is what we're going to compare against, is the PMP measured in watts. All right, so you can see I've got column M all ready to receive my DC power from my nodal data. So I'm going to select that entire column, all 8,760 rows. I'm going to copy it. Let's make sure I got that. I was a little slow with my keystrokes. All right, now I've got it. And then I'm going to paste it in here. And there we have it. So one thing that you got to know is because of daylight savings, I believe, there was somewhat of a disconnect. It was just 1 hour shift in the spring, and then it shifts in the summer and then back in the fall. And so I did have to remove a cell from the PMP measured here in the spring. And then you can see, I think I did that right up here at the beginning, just to get alignment. Now, it doesn't really matter in overall energy, but it does matter when you're looking at the hour by hour comparisons on a daily basis. So I did do that. That's one thing that I did in this file prior to the webinar. But you can see here, starting off in January, like Nick was saying, we do have some pretty big discrepancies between measured data and predicted data in the winter. But as you get into the months that truly matter, so we're going to scroll down right into the middle of the year, and let's scroll over here to the right so you can see the percent differences. So we get pretty close, and this is a day where we're incredibly close. So I'm going to take and highlight our measured and our predicted values, and we will create just a really quick Excel-based chart just to give you an example of how you can do some data analysis. So this is how our measured versus our predicted results look here in August 3rd of this study. And it's pretty well aligned, which is really encouraging. All right. But the thing that I find most encouraging is when I did a sum of energy across the entire year. So when I look at the entire year, our measurements came out at 35 megawatt hours, actually 35.6 megawatt hours from the measurements. When I look at our predicted, we came out at 35.7 megawatt hours. So our differences was only 145 kilowatt hours over this entire 35 megawatt hours of data. So that gives us a difference that is less than 1%. So I have to scroll out to see it's 0.41% difference. Very encouraging to see that we were able to get that accurate when you line up your inputs exactly right. It still is a case, just like anything, any software, you've got to make sure your inputs are done correctly. Garbage in, garbage out is always how that goes. And we had the benefit of measured weather data to help us really get accurate. So it's not always that easy when you're a solar developer designing a power plant and you're trying to understand what kind of an impact bifacial is going to have. Just know that at the core algorithms of these softwares, they're pretty good. They do a pretty good job of measuring, of predicting your measured results when you take all that uncertainty out. So we're pretty excited about these results. And to make things easy on you, you can do this simulation and this analysis all for yourself. You can go in and look at the details, look at the inputs that we have on the prediction, on the inverter, on the module, on the weather data, all for yourself very easily, no cost. It's a gift that we're giving you just for being so kind as to join us today for this discussion. And you can, in a matter of seconds, you're off and analyzing. And I really encourage you all to register and do that. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it back over to our moderator, Andy, as he's going to take us through Q&A.
Yeah, thanks, David. Now we're going to take some time, as David mentioned, to go through some of the questions that you have submitted. This first question, I believe, is for Nick. Did you experience any snowfall in Denmark during the trial? It's an important consideration for choosing bifacial panels in Canada.
Yeah, that's a good question. I get that question a lot. We are at latitude 55 north, which is essentially the south of Scandinavia. It's a similar latitude, I think, as London. So the weather here is not really that alpine kind of, frosty, cold snow you think of. We don't really get any good snow. And in the year that we studied here, I counted, we have a sensor that registers snowfall events. There was, I believe, 6 snowfall events during that winter, but that could be so much as a snowflake. And again, the temperatures don't really get much below freezing. So if there ever is snowfall, it melts really quickly. Snow. I got excited by the potential of measuring snow, but we didn't really see it.
Okay, great, thank you. This next question is also for Nick. How are you able to get around the PVSys need for hourly data, sub-hourly available for other models when comparing measured versus modeled?
So the answer to that question is we didn't. If you check out the details in the paper, we were limited to hourly simulations in PVSys, and since that was really the lowest common denominator, we kept everything at hourly. So the irradiance data, for example, is measured every 10 seconds. And so we take hourly averages, and then we have an uncertainty model. And in the Meteo tab, you can see at each hour, we have a dynamically changing uncertainty. So part of that inter-hour variation contributes to the uncertainty. And then, so it was really just hourly averaging across all the data acquisition platforms, including rear plane of irradiance and power.
Hey, Nick, that sounds like a good follow-up because we could do sub-hourly simulations with PlantPredict, which would be kind of fun since you have the data. So, and that's always a hot topic when talking about simulations, especially with battery storage coming into play. People want sub-hourly data, so very cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Are there any references of vertical bifacial modules installations and its performance?
So it's a topic we specifically have not been working in yet, vertical mounted bifacial PV. I know there's a lot of other groups working on that, but it wasn't part of our paper, and it's not something anyone in my department is looking at, unfortunately.
Okay, great. Next question is, it appears that you used a 2-in-portrait 2P SAT instead of a 1P SAT. What was the reason for this? Do you suspect significant different results with the 1P SAT?
Yeah, so it's correct. It's a 2-in-portrait tracker. And actually, I should mention the south-facing units are also trackers from the same manufacturer. We just oriented them in the south-facing direction and then just kept them static. So we can change the tilt if we want, but we didn't do that. So yeah, all of it is this 2-in-portrait. The reason for that is if you look at the title slide, the company that financed the capital equipment in the park, that's the modules, the trackers, the inverters, it was European Energy. So it was really their pilot project, and it was something that they were interested in. I actually was not involved in the decision to go 1P or 2P. So thank you to them for funding that. It's been a really great industry university collaboration, and without them, the project wouldn't be possible. To answer your question, I do expect there would be differences in bifacial gain in 1P versus 2P. The literature that I've seen suggests that 1P should be give you higher gains than 2P, and it's simply due to the aspect ratio of the height to width. So the 1P has a higher height to width ratio. So therefore you have this higher bifacial gain. But yeah.
Okay. Is SAT backtracking employed at this test site?
Yes, it is. So, but we didn't include those timestamps in the analysis. We filtered them out. So just list-wise deletion of any times when the trackers were backtracking. The reason is when you're looking at the simulated tracker position, that's when we saw the biggest deviations from the actual position to the simulated position. So we have inclinometers in the back of all the trackers. So every minute, I think we get the angular position real time. So in backtracking conditions, that's just where I think there was a lot of discrepancy between the software and the hardware, the simulations and the reality. So yeah, we just kept that out of the analysis.
Okay. Next question is, if you add 0.5 roughly uncertainty, what do you see the total uncertainty of those simulations are?
Oh man, that's a really good question, because yeah, you really should look at this in a holistic way. I think the IEA, International Energy Agency Task 13, PVPS Task 13, has done an excellent job of really doing an inventory of the uncertainty at each one of these steps in the modeling chain. Time and time again, IEA and other people will show, other studies will show that it's really the irradiance contributions. So the solar data input. We used the lowest uncertainty solar irradiance sensors available. So they used to be called secondary standards. Now they're Class A, according to ISO 9060. But yeah, so it's so the largest contributor to the uncertainty is in that data set, is in that file. If you look at the uncertainty column in the irradiance, you'll see that it changes quite a lot. I haven't done the annual propagation of uncertainties, but I think if you look at that column, you will get a sense of the largest contributor, which can be pretty high on low sun angles, because the instruments have called the cosine response, and it starts to deviate from an ideal response. So the uncertainty could be quite high at low sun angles, but I hope that is enough to answer the question.
Great. I believe this question is for David. Can you clarify, did you say that you would be providing this project file so we can dig in a bit?
Yeah, that's like I said, a free gift to everybody who participates. So the file location that Nick and his team are providing for all the inputs is where we're going to put the PPP file. It may be a couple days before we get it out there, but we will make sure that we send an email out to everybody when it's available so that you can do it. Now, it's not that hard to create a prediction and replicate these results on your own with the input that Nick has provided, because we're giving you a global weather file that you can select. The inverter is a global inverter, and the module file is set up as a global. So those are like the three most important things, and they're already set up as global, so you just have to select them on your prediction. But we're still going to provide you a PPP file so that you don't have to fiddle with the albedo values. You don't have to make sure that your backside, your mismatch loss and your structure shading and stuff like that, you don't have to fiddle with those things. It's already going to be set up. But yes, we will be providing that. And it's a great thing for people that are new to PlantPredict to have a prediction already pre-built. And it's a block builder, which in some ways block builder is the less intuitive way, but you'll get access to the map builder capability as well with a free license, and you can have a lot of fun with that. That's one of the things I hear from our users is that PlantPredict makes solar modeling fun, and I love that. So
that's great. Next question is, how important is the accuracy of the albedo value? That is, are nice round numbers acceptable or otherwise having a small impact on the simulation versus a very specific values, something with 3 significant digits?
I'd say it's very important. In the paper, we did some sensitivity analysis of the albedo because, yeah, it's a small site, so we just had one albedo meter, the high quality albedo meter that we have at the site. And we did some sensitivity that showed that, yeah, if we use monthly versus just annual data, there was already a big change in the accuracy of the simulations if we switched over to annual albedo data. So I do think even at sites like ours where there wasn't a whole lot of seasonal variation in the albedo, but there was some. It was 21% plus minus 2%, I think, 21.5%. It does matter to get as precise as possible.
Great, thank you. This next question is for David. Can PlantPredict do a slope analysis on trackers to account for topography?
So it does when it comes to row-to-row shading. So in your DC field, you have the ability to specify what your slope is. And what will happen is we will do calculations around row-to-row shading and make sure that we take into consideration like electrical losses from covering over just certain cells. That's a really important aspect of PlantPredict that we have built in there. We are in the process right now of doing the research required to do slopes that I want to say like table slope. So where the north end of the tracker table is higher than the southern end of the tracker table, and factor that into also the row-to-row shading. We're doing the research right now. That's one of our high priority items that we're going to roll out because we do have in the map builder the ability to model the topography of the site. And so we have the actual slopes of the tables in the system. We just need to do the math around that and make sure that we get the impacts to the plane of array radiance done right. And so that's something that's coming. It doesn't mean you can't do it. It's just that's a risk factor that you have to factor into your prediction. So you have row-to-row shading impacts, so that's good. But any north-south sloping, there may be some error in the results because we're not sloping the tables accordingly. We just keep the tables horizontal to the earth. Something that we're planning to change and something that we're planning to improve on. It's a pretty high priority item for us.
Okay, thank you, David. That's about all the time we have for today. Thank you to everybody who submitted questions. If we didn't get to your question, please feel free to contact us at plantpredict.com/contact. So with that, we will conclude today's webinar. Thanks to everyone again for joining.